Welcome back to Crossover Commander, where we show you how to take your favorite pop culture characters and cross them through the blind eternities so that they can command your deck with style. I'd like to send a huge shout out to my patrons, Deface and Zephyr at my Adept tier, and then Nitron and my new patron Matachu at the Knight tier. Let's kick this portal into overdrive, shall we? Ah, love, a dreadful bond, and yet so easily severed. Tell me, do you fear death? We have Davy Jones for 1, a blue, and a black. This legendary creature has flying, and when he enters the battlefield, you put up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library, and at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library, and you may reveal that card. If a creature card with mana value 6 or greater is revealed this way, you transform Davy Jones into Davy Jones, Lord of the Deep. This Kraken horror has flying, and whenever Davy Jones, Lord of the Deep attacks, create a tapped and attacking token of a copy of another target attacking creature. If that creature is a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent, create 2 of those tokens instead. Davy Jones has the power of the sea at his disposal and can bring the full fury of the ocean's wrath by turn 5. This deck is as unpredictable as the sea. It can lock your opponents out, it can beat them down with beasties, or it can bury your enemies in a wave of combat steps. This deck is treacherous and believes in being unrelenting to get the win. This is the perfect time to remind you that this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme will be added regardless of price. Cards that are not essential to fit the theme will be made as budget friendly as possible. We will begin this deck like any other. Looking at the mana base, we have Mortuary Mire, Halimar Depths, and Rogue's Passage. Then we have Command Tower, Path of Ancestry, Myriad Landscape, and Isolated Watchtower. Mystic Sanctuary, Drownyard Temple, Port of Carfel, and Temple of the False God. Castle Lochthwain, Castle Vantris, Dakmor Salvage, and Drownyard Catacomb, along with Shipwreck Marsh, Darkwater Catacombs, Demir Aqueduct, and Choked Estuary. And to finalize our lands, we have Sunken Hollow, Temple of Deceit, 6 Swamps, and 9 Islands. And for our ramp package, we have Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, Demir Signet, and Felwar Stone, along with Thought Vessel, Arcane Signet, Vessel of Endless Rest, and Herald's Horn. To ensure that the sins of our opponents are laid bare, we run Search for Azcanta for 1 and a blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put it into your graveyard. Then if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you transform Search for Azcanta into Azcanta the Sunken Ruins, which is a legendary land that taps for a blue. And for 2 and a blue, it allows you to look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And then we have Dead Man's Chest for 1 and a black. This enchantment aura enchants a creature an opponent controls, and when that creature dies, exile cards equal to its power from the top of your opponent's library. And you may cast spells from among those cards as long as they remain exiled this way, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast those spells. Then we have Eyes Everywhere for 2 and a blue. This enchantment says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1, and for 5 and a blue, exchange control of Eyes Everywhere and target non-land permanent. Activate this ability only any time you can cast a sorcery. And then we have Retreat to Coral Helm for 2 and a blue. It has landfall, And on the landfall trigger, you may untap or tap target creature or scry one. We also run Windfall for 2 and a blue. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. And Buried Alive for 2 and a black. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Followed by Coastal Piracy for 2 and 2 blue. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. And then Bident of Thassa for 2 and 2 blue. This legendary enchantment artifact says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And for 1 and a blue, you can tap it, and creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. And to round off our draw package, we have Whispering Madness for 2, a blue and a black. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. And it has Cipher, so you attach it to a creature, and then every time that creature attacks, it copies the effect. And then we have Dire Undercurrents for 3 and 2 Dimir. It says whenever a blue creature comes into play under your control, you may have target player draw a card. And whenever a black creature comes into play under your control, you may have a target player discard a card. And then Kindred Discovery for 3 and 2 blue. As Kindred Discovery enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, you draw a card. And then we have Mind Unbound for 4 and 2 blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a lore counter on Mind Unbound, then draw a card for each lore counter on Mind Unbound. Now we look at the Dutchman and its crew, as well as its pets and its beloved goddess. We have the Dutchman for 1 and a blue. This legendary vehicle says whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. You may play lands from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled. And then we have Merfolk Looter for 1 and a blue, and you can tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. Then we have Tidebinder Mage for 2 blue. When Tidebinder Mage enters the battlefield, tap target red or green creature an opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Tidebinder Mage. Then we have Sea Scryer for 1 and a blue. This can tap to add a generic mana, or if you filter mana into it, it can tap for a blue. Followed by the Harbinger of the Tides for 2 blue. You may cast Harbinger of the Tides as though it had Flash if you pay 2 more to cast it, and when it enters the battlefield, you may return target tapped creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. And then the Lol Mage Mentor for 1 and 2 blue says whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may put a 1/1 blue Merfolk creature token onto the battlefield, and then you can tap 7 untapped Merfolk you control to counter target spell. And then we have the Sea Singer for 1 and 2 blue. If you control no islands, you bury the Sea Singer, and you may choose not to untap Sea Singer during your untap step, and you can tap it to gain control of a target creature whose controller controls any islands as long as you control Sea Singer, and Sea Singer remains tapped. And then we have Vodalian Mage for 2 and a blue. For 1 blue, you can tap it to counter a target spell, unless its caster pays an additional 1. Then to round off our crew, we have the Riverwise Augur for 3 and a blue. When Riverwise Augur enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of the library in any order. And then we have Tempest Caller for 2 and 2 blue. When it enters the battlefield, tap all creatures target opponent controls. And then we have Sage of the Falls for 4 and a blue. Whenever Sage of the Falls or another non-human creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. And then Deep Channel Mentor for 5 and a blue says blue creatures you control are unblockable. And then we have Wanderwine Prophets for 4 and 2 blue. It says champion a merfolk. When this comes into play, sacrifice it unless you remove another merfolk you control from the game. When this leaves play, that card returns to play. And whenever Wanderwine Prophet deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a merfolk. If you do, take an extra turn after this one. Now that we've looked at the crew of the Dutchman, we can gaze upon Davy Jones's pets. We have Garuda, Doom of the Depths, for 4 and 2 Dimir. This legendary demon kraken has, when Garuda enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, and you put a creature card with an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. Then we have Serpent of the Yawning Depths. This creature says, Leviathans, octopuses, krakens, and serpents you control can't be blocked unless they are blocked by those creature types. Then we have Spawning Kraken for 5 and a blue. Whenever a kraken, leviathan, octopus, or serpent you control deals combat damage to a player, create a 9/9 blue kraken creature token. And then we have Hullbreaker Horror for 5 and 2 blue. This kraken has flash and can't be countered, and whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1. Return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Then we have Scourge of Fleets for 5 and 2 blue. This kraken says, when Scourge of the Fleets enters the battlefield, return each creature your opponent controls with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands you control. Then we have Lorthos the Tidemaker for 5 and 3 blue. Whenever Lorthos the Tidemaker attacks, you may pay 8. If you do, tap up to 8 target permanents. Those permanents don't untap during their controller's next untap step. And at last we have Calypso, God of the Sea, for 2 and a blue. This legendary god is indestructible, and as long as your devotion to blue is less than 5, Calypso isn't a creature. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you scry 1, and for 1 a blue, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. And at last we Now that we've looked upon the sea's wrath, we'll find out how the Dutchman really works. We have Aqueous Form for 1 blue mana. It says enchanted creature can't be blocked, and whenever enchanted creature attacks you, scry 1. And then we have Marrow Commerce for 1 and a blue. At the end of your turn, untap all merfolk you control. And then Deeproot Waters for 2 and a blue. Has whenever you cast a merfolk spell, you create a 1/1 blue merfolk creature token with hexproof. And now we see the true horror of Davy Jones's plan, with Arcane Adaptation for 2 and a blue. As Arcane Adaptation enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and creatures you control are the chosen type in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Followed by Masquad Nexus for 4 generic mana. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. And then Reflections of Lit Yara says for 4 and a blue. As Reflections of Lit Yara enter the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, copy that spell. And then Followed Footsteps says for 3 and 2 blue, enchant creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a token that's a copy of enchanted creature onto the battlefield. And then Xenograph for 4 and a blue says, as Xenograph enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Each creature you control is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Now that we've seen how the Dutchman twists its crew into monstrosities, we can see how they gain new crew members. We have Feed the Swarm for 1 and a black. destroy target creature an opponent controls or an enchantment they control, and you lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. Then we have Sunken Field. For 1 and a blue, it enchants a land, and you can tap it to counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. And then Tightening Coil for 1 and a blue has Enchanted Creature. Enchanted Creature gets -6/-0 and loses flying. And then we have Encrust for 1 and 2 blue. You enchant an artifact or a creature. Enchanted permanent doesn't untap during its controller's untap step, and its activated abilities can't be activated. And then we have Grim Return for 2 and a black. Choose target creature card in a graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn. Put that card onto the battlefield under your control. Followed by Ashen Powder for 2 and 2 black. Put target creature card from one of your opponent's graveyards into play under your control. And then Whelming Wave for 2 and 2 blue. It says return all creatures to their owner's hands except for krakens, leviathans, octopuses, and serpents. And then Beacon of Unrest for 3 and 2 black. It says put target artifact or creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and you shuffle Beacon of Unrest back into your own library. And then Extract from Darkness for 3, a blue, and a black. Each player mills 2 cards, then you put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And then Necromantic Summons for 4 and a black says put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And if you have Spell Mastery, it gives you 2 additional +1/+1 counters. And then to wrap up this deck, we have Rise from the Grave for 4 and a black. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That creature is a zombie in addition to its other colors and types. And Endless Obedience for 4 and 2 black has Convoke, and you may put a target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And then Boneyard Parlay for 5 and 2 black says exile up to 5 target creature cards from graveyards. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put all cards from the pile of your choice onto the battlefield under your control, and the rest into their owner's graveyards. And then Fated Return for 4 and 3 black says put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains Indestructible. If it's your turn, you scry 2. And then Rise of the Dark Realms for 7 and 2 black says put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. Now that we've delved through the murky depths of Davy Jones' locker, we can look at the average price and stats of the deck. At time of release, it's between $188 and $250, depending on where you purchase from. As always, if you're willing to use heavily played or damaged cards, that'll be cheaper. And then the stats are 11 ramp, 1 tutor, about 13 card draws, counting a little extra for all the scrying, and then 15 forms of interaction, 1 board wipe, and 36 lands. Remember, this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme were added regardless of price. Cards that were not essential to fit the theme were made as budget-friendly as possible. If you want to optimize this list, feel free to leave your upgrades in the comments section below. Most importantly, this deck is meant to be a new and engaging way to spice up your Commander games, so fun is the top priority. Thank you for watching this crossover deck tech. If you liked this video, check out our other content on YouTube or TikTok. Your viewership means the multiverse to the crossover Commander, and if you would like to become a part of this growing Terran reality, you can like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to vote on the next pop culture character to crossover, check out our Patreon where we have some awesome perks. If you have any ideas or complaints, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Now that this portal's closing, see you next time.